"The Lady of Lorien, Galadriel!" cried Sam. "Beautiful she is, sir. Lovely. Sometimes like a great tree in flower. Sometimes like a white daffodilly. Small and slender-like. Hard as diamonds, soft as moonlight. Warm as sunlight, cold as frost in the stars. Proud and far off as a snow mountain, and as merry as any lass I ever saw with daisies in her hair in springtime." Megel Vanenmelen, Joysten here with another epic character history for you all today. As you have requested on Facebook and through many comments and messages, this is to be my next video. Now I must say that in researching Galadriel's history, I have found that, like many parts of Tolkien's legendarium, Galadriel has a confusing history that has many distinct tales, but for this video, our scope will focus on Galadriel's more definite history, while exploring some of the possible legends. Let's get into it. Galadriel was born in the year 1362, during the Years of the Trees before the First Age. She was the fourth and youngest child of the great Noldorian elf Finarfin and his Teleran wife, Eärwen. Galadriel was their only daughter, and in those times she stood as a strong and tall maiden, unlike many other elven maidens of that day. As she was unusually tall and strong as she grew, her mother called her Nerwen, meaning man-maiden, in Quenya. Galadriel's hair was so beautiful that the Eldar said it had captured the light of the two trees, as it was both gold and silver, something she inherited from both of her parents. Of course, this drew her uncle Feanor's attention, who wanted her hair in his crafts, and she looked within him and saw his malice. Galadriel was very gallant, and alongside her power and beauty, she could also peer into the minds of others. Quote, "She had a marvelous gift of insight into the minds of others, but judged them with mercy and understanding." End quote. However, Galadriel was also very self-willed, as were all of her line except Finarfin. Like the others of her kin, she had dreams of far-off lands in Middle-earth, and she desired to rule her own realm one day. And so it was that in the First Age, and during the darkening of Valinor, after the death of Finwë, her grandfather, and the theft of the Silmarils, Galadriel joined Feanor's Noldor in rebelling against the Valar, and though she swore no oaths, like Feanor and his sons, she became a leader of the Noldor in their migration from Aman to Beleriand. Now, as for how she got to Beleriand, there are multiple tales, but the most canonical tale is in the Silmarillion and The Road Goes Ever On, where Galadriel went towards Beleriand and Middle-earth in a second force of the Noldor led by Fingolfin. Thus Galadriel nor her forces were at hand when Feanor committed the kinslaying at Alqualondë, where Galadriel's mother is from, and thus she saw Feanor's elves burn the ships at the port of Loskar, upon the other coast, across the sundering seas. In this version, Galadriel's forces crossed Helcaraxe, or the Ice Fangs. That was an ice waste connecting Aman to the northern shores in Beleriand. Now, there are other possible ways that Galadriel came to Beleriand written in the Unfinished Tales chapter, The History of Galadriel and Celeborn, but I believe the Silmarillion contains the more canonical explanation. And so Galadriel came to live in Doriath in the year 52 of the First Age with her brother Finrod, most likely. And through her familial connection to Olwe, her grandfather, she was welcomed by Thingol, her grand-uncle, who ruled over the realm of Doriath. Galadriel would spend much time in the court of Thingol and Melion, becoming good friends with Melion the Maya. She also met Celeborn, a kinsman of Thingol, who she would later marry. She would also travel to Nargothrond to visit her brother, where Finrod left Doriath to rule. In her conversations with Melion, Galadriel discussed the exile of the Noldor, while leaving out certain details of elven violence and sorrow, such as the death of Finwë, the kinslaying, and the burning of the ships. But Melion was able to piece the story together, and in turn, she told Thingol about Galadriel's deeds. And though she was not expelled from Doriath because of the sympathy of Thingol, after a time she went to dwell in Nargothrond with Finrod, as he was the only brother that was still alive. Galadriel asked him if he would ever take another wife, and in turn he said that he had made an oath to himself not to, as he left his wife in Valinor. Eventually, it seems Galadriel went to live in the havens of Sirion, along with the other survivors of Beleriand, and then would go to Lindon at or before the beginning of the Second Age. For the most part, Galadriel didn't do anything extraordinary in the First Age, as she mostly dwelt in Doriath and then Nargothrond, missing the dangers that came to both of those elvish dwellings, while believing Morgoth was beyond the power of the Eldar to defeat. And it seems to me that the Valar and some of the elves regarded her with disdain because of her tenacity and willingness to rebel against the Valar, even if she had no part in those deeds. Eventually, Morgoth, the fallen Vala, was defeated by the combined might of the first and second-born of Iluvatar, and by the coming of the Valar out of the west. As stated in the new Tolkien Companion and The Road Goes Ever On, the Valar welcomed some Noldor back after the fall of Morgoth, but Galadriel was specifically not one of them, and a ban was set upon her return. But she cared not, as she was prideful and had no interest in returning to Valinor anyway. Thus, the Second Age began as Galadriel and Celeborn had gone to live in Lindon, under the rule of High King Gil-Galad. The two dwelt in the fiefdom of Harlindon and ruled there for a time. They had a daughter named Celebrian, who would eventually come to marry Elrond Half-Elven. Eventually, they came to live in Eregion, under the direct rule of Celebrimbor, the grandson of Feanor, still in the kingdom of Gil-Galad. Through the Mines of Moria and peace with the dwarves, Galadriel and Celeborn made contact with a Teleran-descended settlement in the valley of the Anduin River, on the other side of the Misty Mountains. Thus the Lord and Lady went through the mines to live in this land named Lindorianand, meaning Vale of the Land of the Singers, under the rule of Omdir. Peace wouldn't last for the elves, however, as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, would come to Eregion to teach Celebrimbor and other elves ringcraft. Galadriel heavily distrusted Anatar, and advised Celebrimbor to not trust him either. Eventually, the Rings of Power were crafted around the year 1600 of the Second Age, and Galadriel counseled Celebrimbor to hide the three elven rings. Eventually, Anatar revealed himself as Sauron the Deceiver, and proceeded to invade Eregion. Celebrimbor gave Galadriel Nenya, the Ring of Adamant, for safekeeping before being overrun by Sauron. Many Noldor of Sindarin's speech came to Lindorianand. Celeborn fortified this land against Sauron's forces who tried to cross the Anduin. Eventually, with the help of the Númenóreans, the elves and men were able to defeat Sauron. But after the downfall of Númenor, the Dark Lord returned, and a White Council of the Second Age formed in the newly made Imladris, or Rivendell, north of Eregion. This wasn't the same White Council that the wizards were part of in the Third Age, but rather one to combat Sauron during the War of the Last Alliance. At this point, Galadriel and Celeborn came to Rivendell with their daughter, and Elrond met and fell in love with her. The War of the Last Alliance progressed, and the King of Lindorianand was killed in the Battle of Daggerlad. Celeborn may have also participated in the war, and after it finished in 3441 of the Second Age, he and Galadriel continued to dwell in Lindorianand. Then, partway through the Third Age, after the death of Omdir's son, King Amroth, in the Bay of Belfalas, Galadriel and Celeborn became the Lord and Lady of the Galadrium, meaning the Tree People, and they renamed Lindorianand Lothlorien, meaning the Dreamflower. As Sauron no longer had the One Ring, and couldn't peer into the mind of Galadriel as he wished, Galadriel could use Nenya freely, so she did. She planted the Malorn trees that Gil-Galad had given her so long ago, and using the power of her ring, she made Lothlorien beautiful and incredible. It became renowned for having the only Malorn trees east of the sea. Galadriel continued by creating Caros Galadhon, the capital of Lothlorien, and she kept the borders of Lothlorien protected, all with the strength of her ring. Galadriel played a great part in conceiving the White Council of the Third Age in 2463. She recommended that Gandalf be the head of the order, but he refused. Saruman took this charge, however. Galadriel had been on friendly terms with the wizards since their arrival earlier on in the Third Age. This council discussed the threat of Dol Guldur that they would later expel in 2941 of the Third Age, during the events of The Hobbit, and through Gandalf's work, they realized that Sauron indeed was returning. During the War of the Ring, Galadriel served a mentoring and protecting role for the Fellowship of the Ring. After they escaped from the mines of Moria, Galadriel kept the company safe for a time in Lothlorien. She was able to test the minds of the Fellowship and see their thoughts and desires and test their purity. Later, she would show the hobbits Frodo and Sam her mirror that held the water used in Lothlorien. It would show, quote, things that were, and things that are, and things that yet may be, end quote. These possible events led Frodo to tempt Galadriel with the One Ring, who, after some deliberation of the power that she might hold with it, declined it, finally understanding her own meaning in life and her own power, and passing the test, so to speak. Thus, Galadriel would go west and diminish after all this time, but it would be after the war was won, if the war was won. See, I think the temptation to rule the world was her test, set forth by the Valar in a sense, and after she passed, I believe the Valar lifted her ban on coming to Valinor, as she had found her place, purpose, and power in life. At her parting with the Fellowship, she gave many gifts, like the light of Erendil that held the light of the two trees, among other gifts. One of the most important gifts that she gave was the Elisar stone to Aragorn, which is a stone that Aragorn would make an heirloom of his house and the source of his kingly name. With this item, there are two ways that Galadriel may have gotten it, both of which are mentioned in the Lost Tales. One possible answer is that Celebrimbor forged it in the Second Age, and, in love with Galadriel, gave this gift to her during her time in Eregion. Another is that the same stone saved by Idriel during the fall of Gondolin in the First Age gave it to Erendil, her son. He would have brought it with him over the sea to Valinor, but it is possible that Gandalf brought it back when the wizards came from Valinor, as a token from Yavanna that the Valar had not forsaken the free peoples. In these notes from Tolkien, Gandalf would give it to Galadriel, who said prophetically that she would hold it for a little while before passing it to another who would be called Elisar. Both of these explanations are possible and very interesting, but either way, the Fellowship departed Lothlorien rested and renewed. On that same day, Gwaihir would fulfill his obligation to Galadriel to find Gandalf, and he would bring him to Lothlorien, to be recloaked in white, symbolizing his leadership in the White Council and the Order of the Wizards. Galadriel would send words with Gandalf for the three hunters as he ventured to Rohan. Later in the War of the Ring, forces from Dol Guldur would try to attack Lothlorien 3 times, but were repelled by Galadriel's powers from her ring 3 times. Galadriel and her ring were so powerful at this time that it is said in Appendix A of The Return of the King that only Sauron in battle himself could overcome her. After the One Ring was destroyed and Sauron perished, Celeborn's forces captured Dol Guldur, and Galadriel used the remaining power of her ring to throw down its walls and lay bare its pits, as she mirrored and recalled Luthien to Nuviel, who did the same at Tol Sirion, another tower of Sauron's in the First Age. It's a very interesting parallel between Galadriel and Luthien at that point. Galadriel and Celeborn would remain in Middle-earth until 3021 of the Third Age, journeying to Aragorn and Arwen's wedding, meeting the Ents and Treebeard, and then traveling west to the Grey Havens. Thus, with the other ring-bearers, Galadriel finally diminished after more than 7,000 years of life, and journeyed into the west. After she sailed west, there is speculation as to whether she tried to heal Frodo's wounds, and if she was successful or not. There is also hope that she received Gimli in Valinor in the year 120 of the Fourth Age, as that dwarf really loved her. And personally, I'd like to believe these speculations, as it's a very interesting and great way to end her character, by finally diminishing her and letting her heal the wounds of the past. In Tolkien's Legendarium, Galadriel serves to truly represent all forms of beauty and grace, a sense of redemption and purity in its most powerful form. Her skills and elven magic, as the hobbits would put it, contributes in making The Lord of the Rings the fantasy that it is. As this video is only so long and can cover only so much, please look into the Unfinished Tales, and specifically the chapter entitled The History of Galadriel and Celeborn, to learn more about Galadriel and her history. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed Galadriel's character history. If you did, please hit that like button, as it goes a long way in helping this video and the channel. Let me know your thoughts on this high elf in the comments down below. If you liked this topic, I have more videos where I delve into related topics even further, like the history of Gil-Galad, why Gimli asked for Galadriel's hair, and a video all about the Elven rings. I'll leave them in the description below, and I really hope you enjoy them. Please share this video with a friend who you think might like it, and subscribe to see my next videos. And I will see you all next week with a video on the Beornings. As always, thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.